I'm Colin Lambert, and welcome to another video podcast from Lambert Creative Media. So glad to have you with us today. And sorry for the delay. When you do things live, you occasionally have a few issues along the way, but we're glad to be with you today. Thanks for taking a few minutes. Let me tell you a couple of things right up front. First of all, if you're not subscribed to my channel, I want to encourage you to do so. We'll notify you anytime something's coming out, and we got some great conversations coming up. Tomorrow, we'll be talking with a young lady who's involved in radio in Nairobi, Kenya. And it should be a good conversation as we learn more about what she's doing to engage her culture. But again, just go to the Lambert Creative Media YouTube page, subscribe, click on that little bell so you get notified anytime something new comes up. And of course, want to encourage you to share as well anytime you can, you find it interesting. Like and comment also. We'd love to hear from you in that sense. So grateful for you taking a moment to be here today. Got a special guest with me today. Excited about the opportunity to have this young man join me. Had a chance to work with him for a number of years. He hosts a morning program in Cleveland for Moody Radio. He's a podcaster. He's the founder of 12-2 Media. And we're also going to talk, I think, a few minutes before we get out of here today about living on a farm. I'm sure that's an interesting experience as well. So I hope you'll welcome with us today, Brian Dolan. Brian, great to have you with us today. Let me just start with a little bit about your career. You got into radio at a fairly early age, but not in the traditional sense. Tell us what you did before you got into radio, and then we're going to talk about your podcast.
Yeah, so I started off my career life as a high school teacher. I taught 6 years of public high school at Robbinsdale Cooper High School in just a first-ring suburb of Minneapolis, and ended up my church bought airtime on an AM station in the Twin Cities on Saturdays and did a 2-hour live show. And I went from being a guest on it a few times to catching the radio bug and being a producer, and then ultimately my pastor went on sabbatical and I took the show for 6 months, and very long story short, eventually went to Chicago to work with you, and you kind of hired me. So thank you for that.
It
No,
was
you
my
did hire me,
pleasure.
not kind of.
I did. Uh, Talk about that transition before we get to the podcast. Talk about that transition. I know that you have a love for radio, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. But that's a big move from a high school teacher to radio, though you had a little bit of the bug from doing the show with your pastor. Talk a bit about that transition for you.
In terms of the experience or how it happened
Yeah,
or
yeah.
which,
How it affected you, kind of the mindset.
yeah.
Was it scary? What did you feel in the process?
Well, it was this, the learning curve was about this steep. I was self-taught in the Twin Cities market. So there was some things that I kind of figured out instinctually, but a lot of it, I just had no clue. And to jump in and have you and the host at the time, Mark Elstrand of the morning show on WMBI, take a chance on me was pretty dramatic. I was grateful that you did it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember one of the first couple of weeks, I had to fill in on traffic reports, and I didn't even know where I was, let alone like what the roads were called. So that was quite the adventure. But gratefully, you and Mark Elstrand spent a lot of time investing in me and showing me the business and taking some kind of like raw abilities and knowledge and turning it into and turning it into really an apprenticeship is what it felt like for me after a number of years.
Yeah. Well, it was obvious from the beginning that you had skills, and it seemed that you had the bug as well. And from my experience, once you get the bug, it's hard to get off of whatever that is that's got you. So, boy, you grew through so much. Before we get to the podcast, and I want to do it up front in this conversation because anybody who's tuned in to hear about this mystery of family, I want to give them a chance to get that. But just before we get to that, you actually were involved, if I remember correctly, in one of the first, what we might call a podcast in the very, very earliest days at Moody. Talk for a moment about that.
Yes, I developed a great working relationship and friendship with who's now the general manager of Moody Radio, Scott Cruz. And Scott and I don't even know if I remember what year this was, Colin. Was it like 2010, 2011,
Yeah,
maybe?
yeah, yeah.
We really wanted to show leadership at Moody that podcasting is a relevant area. And what previously, what a lot of radio people thought podcasting was, and still today in some respects, it's true. It's a place where you do radio show reruns. But the reality is that's not, I mean, while that is something you can do, the vast majority of highly successful podcast products are not that. They are standalone programs on a podcasting platform directly to a podcasting audience. So I had the concept for the show, which was at the time called What Did They Say Now, was I had noticed as a producer of a major market radio show that the most interesting conversations were happening when the mics were off, where guests and hosts and such would do the Christian answers and such on the air. As soon as the mics went off, you'd hear them tell you what they really think or really grapple with difficult things. And I wondered, what would it be like if we actually recorded that? Would people eavesdrop on honest conversations between Christians? Not that other ones were dishonest, that's not what I'm implying, but just like fully transparent. And from there, we gathered a group of people. One of them was Barnabas Piper, who's got his own podcast and author thing going now, and our friend Courtney Gaines, who worked at Moody. And the three of us did that podcast project for a number of years, where it was a weekly release, where we just essentially, we were given a topic right before we hit record, and the audience would listen to us have an organic conversation about something related to faith and life.
It was actually an exciting time, and when you all came to me with that, I just thought, let's try this, because I was always wanting to try new things, and I loved what you all did with that, and I love that you even used the term organic, because that's really, I believe, where a lot of podcasting begins, and it's from that organic nature that, hey, there's something to discuss, and we're just gonna do it naturally. We're not gonna script it. We're not gonna put it together. But you all did such a great job. Barnabas Piper, John Piper's son, has The Rant, I think, is his new podcast, or his latest podcast he does with some other guys. And Courtney's gone on to do some wonderful things in helping not-for-profits and other organizations raise funds. And now here you are, you're hosting the morning show in Cleveland, and it's time for another podcast. Tell me, first of all, how did this become in your mind, the possibility of a podcast? Give us a little backstory on the grandfather effect.
Well, the original concept didn't have anything to do with me at all. In a sense of, I didn't envision myself as the subject of a podcast series. I'm a mega fan of podcasting, and this was back in 2016, like fall of 2016. I had realized that really the most popular podcast genre and format, whatever you want to call it, is storytelling. And some of the most wildly successful programs have been ones that tell stories of a particular type. And it started with Serial many years ago from NPR. It's the concept where the host of the program tells a story and brings you along on the journey of discovery, in that they don't know the end. That there's this unwritten agreement with the listener that they don't know how it's going to end. They're going to take you along with them, and you all agree that the ending could be great. It could be unresolved, could be unsatisfactory. Whatever it is, you're coming along for the journey. So it's a particular type of storytelling that involves a measure of transparency. You don't cut for just the perfect things. You include a lot of B-roll, and I thought that was something that Christians could be doing and should be doing. But we weren't. Really, the only kind of podcasting we were doing at that time, and up until very recently, was reruns of radio shows, or just live conversation, live to tape, and then sermons. And so I went to my boss at the time, who happened to still be Scott Cruz, the general manager now of Moody Radio, and I said, "This is a great concept. We should do this." But by the way, the other twist to my vision for it was, I think that we as Christians have a lot of stories to tell that do not have the gospel itself as the story arc. In that, I think we feel pressure, for obvious reasons, to make all of our stories about the gospel. As in, I'm not saved, something happens, I get saved, and live happily ever after.
Yeah.
I have a lot of issues with that, which we can get into if you'd like to, maybe a different time. But I thought, why not tell one of the stories we have after we get saved, what it's like to live out your faith in Christ in the midst of life's unresolved. Scott was in on the concept, and just because I'm a little lazy, I thought maybe I could come up with a topic of my own. do I have something in my own life that's unresolved that I don't have an answer to that I could take people along on the journey with? And I really just had one thing I could think of that might have a possibility of discovery, and it would be that my paternal grandfather disowned us when I was about like 3 years old. And the answer my parents had given me was something that I felt was relatively unsatisfactory and didn't really say much. So the concept was just simply, I want to tell this type of story. I'm going to develop a demo surrounding this. Maybe it won't even be interesting, and that'll just give someone else an idea to do an actual project. But that's not exactly how it ended up.
Yeah. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I want to not give anything away. So if I ask any questions that you feel like gives away too much, just stop me. I have listened to the whole series and I love it.
Sure.
And so I'll try to avoid any spoilers, but I do want to kind of talk about that. So here you are, you're looking for something that you can podcast about, and you're looking for a story. Uh, there's some vulnerability involved right up front of you digging into something. I mean, just what you shared there right at the beginning, being abandoned, the feeling of being abandoned by a grandfather. I mean, that's something pretty deep. And right up front, I assume you knew this was going to involve quite a bit of vulnerability on your part. Talk for a moment about that.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes and no. And what I mean is I knew there'd be vulnerability, but it was based on two false presumptions, I think. Presumption number one was that my presumption was the explanation for the disownment was my grandfather must have just been a big jerk. And if I just did enough digging, I could prove it. The end.
Mm.
And then the second part was I didn't really think much would come of it. Like my vision for it from the beginning was that it would probably end up being a demo of a couple of episodes, maybe two, and then I would like float it to the big shots like you, and then you guys would say good or not, or I like the idea. Now either start over from scratch or we should do this type of storytelling. I didn't envision that it actually would go anywhere, honestly.
Mm. Talk for a minute about the length of this process. I kind of teased it in the slide that we used to promote this, but this was a lengthy process. Talk for a moment about that.
Yeah, so I knew based on the vulnerability issue that even creating a demo would require permission from my family. I didn't want it to be a voyeuristic without their permission thing. And primarily, I thought it was my parents' permission. So I wrote to them in November of 2016 to just simply ask for permission to. I told them the vision for the type of storytelling, painted the picture of what I was trying to accomplish, and then thought this might work. Would you be willing to explore this with me? Because obviously I'd have to interview my parents for this. I wrote them an email just so they wouldn't have to process it right in front of me. We talked through it a few times, and at the end of the day, they said, "Sure, yeah, we'll do that. That's no problem." So that developed into me essentially then just bringing them in the studio, and we spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours talking, and I just kind of grilled them about him, about the past, about what happened, about the relationship with him, and then sat on the audio, and then had to kind of develop a system on my own because I was on my own. Now, when you listen to a series like Serial or any NPR podcasts, what you discover is that they have huge staffs. They have like multiple engineers, producers, hosts. But I had to figure out how do I do this. And from the very beginning, I learned that there was multiple phases where it's you do the interview, but then you have to edit the interview and pull out what's worthwhile keeping, clean it up. Then you have to figure out uh, how do I tell this story? So you have to storyboard it. Then you have to write a script to insert the host, narrative throughout it to make it, me telling the story with you, following along and experiencing it with me. Then you have to record the voiceover. Then you have to put it all together into a file. Then you have to find music to go underneath it that's the right tone, and you have to fade it in and out. And pretty soon I learned that it was taking me months to put together an episode. And so what I mean through after two episodes were finished, I pitched it in a gentle way with Scott Cruz's help to some folks at Moody. And I think at that time, just nobody quite understood what it was or what I was doing. And in their defense, it didn't make any sense comparatively speaking to what was happening at the time. So there's periods of rest and periods of reflection and waiting. And so it really was a journey that started in 2016 and then it released in May of 2022. So it took quite a while to pull it all together.
Well, it is an incredible amount of work, and you're right. Most of the large organizations that do this well just have a huge staff, and did so much of this on your own in the early stages. I know there were
Right.
others involved. We'll talk about that in a moment. Um, so the story basically is you felt abandoned as a young boy by your grandfather, and this is your journey kind of back to that world to find out more about this story, not knowing really where it was going to end, which to me is a bit of vulnerability in that.
Yeah.
But you didn't just talk to your parents; you talked to family members. Some you had never met, some you had met before and just hadn't had conversations with recently. Just kind of at a high level, what was your what were your thoughts about reconnecting with family members maybe that you had never connected with or had only connected with years ago? What was that like?
Uh, I've always had kind of an insatiable desire to understand story and to understand family and family connection. So it was actually nice for me to have an excuse to reach out to family that I wasn't in regular contact with. Um, and a lot of people have asked whether I was nervous for it. I mean, I was nervous to get the conversations going, but quite frankly, the relationships were so distant that I also didn't have a lot to lose. And I know it sounds harsh, but what I mean is if you don't have a really close relationship with someone, if you ask hard questions and they get angry and won't speak to you, and they really already don't speak to you, then nothing really changes. So I felt like it was worth a risk in some respects to push through the discomfort. Um, and so it was a bit surreal. I was pleasantly surprised at how willing my family was to meet with me, to let me record conversations. I was pleasantly surprised at how open everybody was to share their thoughts and reflections, and were supportive, even though we didn't really know each other all that well. So I would say overall it was a positive experience. Uncomfortable at times, but I'm also a little bit odd in that, and maybe even a little sadistic in that I like uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
It's kind of a lot of what I do on the radio anyway, so that didn't intimidate me at all from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I've had the opportunity, the privilege to listen to the whole series, and it's one of those things that I can honestly say I laughed, I cried, and more. There are moments of joy and laughter. There are moments of pain, and even though um, it is your unique story, Brian, I think one of the important things about it, and I think about storytelling in general, is the fact that most of the time, if a story is told well, we can identify with different pieces of that story. And though
Yeah,
I didn't have any grandparents that abandoned me or that was the feeling I got, I was very involved with my grandparents. So many of the family dynamics in this podcast uh, touched me deeply, or I could reflect on those conversations, those thoughts, those feelings that were tied to that. And I think as people listen to it, they're going to experience that. And if you're watching today live or later, I just want to encourage you to go check out The Grandfather Effect. I believe it's 7 or 8 episodes. There's an opening and a closing, but it's not something that's going to take you forever. But boy, it is well done, and it is an
thank you.
incredible journey. And I'm just so glad that Moody went for it and that you did it. And no better person, Brian, I don't think, to do it than you. So
Well, thank you.
congratulations on this podcast. Just before we move away from the podcast, maybe a thought or two about what you learned from the experience, your takeaways from the experience, either familially through your family situation and or the experience of putting this podcast together, or both.
Well, let's start with the podcasting part of it. What I can say is that while I spent a lot of the time on my own and did a lot of the rough work on my own and the storyboarding, I couldn't have done it without two individuals, our executive producer, Emma Van de Velde, who's incredibly talented, and Caleb Gray, who was our engineer, and he mixed and mastered the whole thing. He took, atrocious quality audio and made it sound good for the listener. And Emma helped become a third party where, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you're super close to a story, it's sometimes hard to evaluate what should be cut and what should be kept. And she was able to really kind of refine the story and help me tell it really effectively. So I would say one of the big lessons is things are better when you allow other creative people to do what they do best in a team setting. What we accomplished is better than I could have done on my own. And so I think teamwork is a big thing that I learned to support. It's hard because especially when it's a personal story and when you
Yeah.
invest a lot of time in telling any particular story, it's very personal. You get strong opinions. But I've learned if you just let go and let other people insert their own talent, if they have the credibility, they can make it even better, even when you're uncomfortable with it. In terms of personal takeaways, I do a lot of reflecting towards the end, which I'll let that be what it is. But what I can tell you is that it's worth going to hard relational places with your family in order to create more intimacy. Even though I think a lot of us think it's easier if we ignore problems, whether it's in our marriages or with our kids or our brother or sister or dad, mom or dad, it's not easier. In fact, it honestly makes it more complicated and can ruin relationships. And so what I would say is it's worth going to hard places. And at the end of the day, I think the more we learn how to make deep emotional connections with our family and with our friends, the more we learn how to really make a deep emotional connection with the Lord. And so I found that not only did I learn a lot about marriage and about family, but I learned a lot about my faith in Jesus and what it means to really be close to him as a part of the process.
Yeah, that's good. You have founded recently 12-2 Media. Before we move to the morning show, tell me briefly about that, and can we look forward to more podcasts?
Lord willing, yeah. The company is actually a joint effort with my wife, where we realized with the help of a friend that we actually have some crossover abilities. She's turning out to be a very successful marketing strategist, and we're hoping that over time the Lord uses the business as a way for not only me to grow my work in voice and in podcasting and storytelling, but marketing is really storytelling. And so we hope we can be a powerhouse together where we not only help people tell their stories and share them out and spread the word, but also help companies and individuals tell their stories. And then we just happen to have a voice talent and storyteller on staff. So it's a marriage joint effort. It's new. So Lord willing, you will hear some more podcasts, yes, from the product.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for sharing about that. For
You
those
bet.
who don't know you, we talked a little bit at the beginning about radio, the radio piece. And of course, as you started working with the morning show in Chicago, did a lot of things in Chicago. Now, how long has it been now? Like 7, 8 years or more? How long has it been you've been in Cleveland?
I think I've been in Cleveland for 7 years now. I started at Moody in 2008, came here in 2015. I was told there'd be no math before we started, so I believe that's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20, 7 years, yes. So 7 years in Cleveland.
So tell us about the morning show.
So my approach to radio was born out of my very first podcast project, What Did They Say Now? And it's just that we would have honest, open conversations about today's issues from a biblical perspective. Moody Radio seeks to have our morning shows do that, talk about today's issues from a biblical perspective to help people take their next step in their walk with Jesus. And on Brian and Janelle Mornings, that's what we do. Whether it's Christian living or current events, I don't care what it is or how hard it is to talk about. I want to talk about it, and I want to be honest about it, and I want to try to. What guides us is Romans 12:2 is one of those guiding passages for us, and it's that we let the Word of God transform us into new people by changing the way we think. That's the New Living Translation, in my variation of it at least. And so we try to make sure that all of our thinking and everything we do conforms to that of the Scriptures.
I know that you enjoy the program. Janelle's a great co-host. She's your second co-host. You had another co-host before that, but I know you and Janelle have clicked, and she and you are both lots of fun in the mornings.
Thanks.
For folks who have never been a part of the morning show, I believe they can listen from anywhere on the app, correct?
Yep, the Moody Radio mobile app is a great place to go if you're anywhere in the country. You can find our Cleveland affiliate there has links to listen there. You can also go to brianandjanelle.org. Google Brian and Janelle, easy way to find it. Or you could search for us through the Moody Radio app and the Grandfather Effect available through moodyradio.org.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, I kind of teased this actually in the title of this program. I referenced you as Farmer Brian. This is a new thing for you, and I'm telling you,
Yeah.
the furthest thing from my mind as I thought about what you'd be doing in future years. But you and your family just recently bought a farmhouse and have literally begun to throw yourself into that. Talk for just a moment about that experience.
Yeah. So if you're a farmer and you're watching, I'm not a farmer. If you're just a regular person that lives in the suburbs, I probably look like I'm on Green Acres basically, and I'm like running a farm or whatever. So my wife and I, our oldest daughter, um, as a young child, had a ton of interest in animals, and so we got her plugged into 4-H. Neither of us had any experience with animals, and just over time, our whole family kind of adapted to the concept of loving.
Well, I just lost Brian. That's what happens when you're going live. He's talking about the farm, and off he goes. I'm not sure if we're going to get him back here. I'll pause just a moment to see if he gets back in. But he was just saying that his daughter's been involved in some of the 4-H stuff, has been for quite some time, and a local farmhouse came open, and he and his wife bought that farmhouse. They've moved the family out there, and they've built chicken coops. I think they're getting animals. They are beginning the farming process. I probably was a little far ahead calling him Farmer Brian. He may be not quite there yet, but he's well on his way. And I believe that they have already started putting the whole place together with animals. And I would expect they'll be growing some things soon there on the farm. But anyway, a cool experience for this family. He's got a lot of kids, and they love, it seems, the farm life. Love to see them doing that. A good way, again, that you can follow Brian if you're interested. I've flashed it up a number of times. You can go to this address, briandolan.com, briandolan.com. That tells all about his work, his speaking, podcasts, radio, all those different things that he does. And then, of course, the other address there that you can see is moodyradio.org/grandfather. And that is to access the Grandfather Effect podcast that we talked about in the primary part of this conversation today. Now, let me remind you, you can also access that through the Moody Radio app. Just search for that Moody Radio app. Not only is all Moody Radio programming there, but all of the podcasts that they do, including the Grandfather Effect. You can find that there as well. So I think Brian is out and done. We were having trouble even getting started through the firewall at his office, and he was kind enough to use the phone in his car. So just so grateful for Brian's time today. I think he's back. I'll give him a chance to say goodbye and wrap up the farm story. Hey, dude.
Sorry about that. I never had this happen. My phone overheated. There you go.
Oh,
Thanks,
well,
Apple.
and that happens when you're sitting in the car. And again, I was just thanking you for running out and getting a good signal because you weren't getting the signal you needed in the office. I was just sharing about the farm. You have a number of kids. Your daughter had been
Yes.
involved with 4-H. And just quickly as we close, tell me about what y'all are thinking about the farm. Are you enjoying it? And you going to be planting crops soon?
So we're on 5.5 acres in rural Ohio, and we started a garden and are learning a lot about that. We have 2 pigs, 2 goats, about 10 chickens. We're learning a lot. It was an Amish-owned farm before we got it, so we've been very busy getting electricity and HVAC over the last
Yeah,
year and doing all that stuff. But it's been an adventure. We like it so far. So
that's awesome.
check with me in a year. I'll tell you for sure.
We will check back with you for sure. Hopefully, the next time you've got a podcast around or something to share. I've flashed up your website, briandolan.com, also moodyradio.org/grandfather for the grandfather effect. Or again, folks can find that on the Moody Radio app as well. Brian, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate you, have from the very early days that we met. Appreciate your work. I love your family. I hope you know that, and I hope you'll give them a good big hug from the Lamberts in Austin. And just so thrilled to see what God is doing in your life. And again, if you have not seen The Grandfather Effect, I want to encourage you to do it. You will laugh, you will cry, and it will connect with you. If you have a family of any size, I believe that it will connect with you. And so, Brian, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Colin, and right back at you. Thanks for taking a chance on a teacher all those years ago.
Yeah, it was worth the chance, and it paid off. So, Brian Dolan, thanks so much for being with us today. Great to have you with us as well. Let me remind you, encourage you to subscribe and to like and to share this podcast with others. If you'll subscribe and ring that little bell, we'll notify you anytime something's coming up. In fact, if you're watching this live tomorrow, I believe it's 1:30 Central Time, I'll be talking with Tess Waka. She is on the air in Nairobi, Kenya on Nation FM. She and her husband, who's a pastor, do marriage and dating conferences. They're engaging with their culture in Nairobi, Kenya. And I want to share a little bit of her story tomorrow. That's, I believe, 1:30 Central Time tomorrow. You subscribe, you won't miss it. Thanks so much for taking time to be here today. Grateful for you. Thank you for taking the time to be here. And again, share, like, and subscribe. So much appreciate your time today. I'm Colin Lambert with Lambert Creative Media, and we'll see you again next time.